Good evening, everyone. I'm Laura Keim. I'm Stenton's curator, and I'm here with, I will be joined shortly with Bob, and who's the author of Remember My Name, and our two Dinahs, Irma and Marissa, to moderate this live portion of the program and to move us into discussion of the story, the video, and the processes that actually grew quite organically to create this telling you've just witnessed. As we go along, please submit your questions in the Q&A, and we'll do our best collectively to be sure we answer them. But before we turn to the Q&A formally, I just was hoping we'd have a chance to hear a little bit from each of our performers and from Bob about their creative work that went into making this happen. And as Rachel mentioned, we had this residency component with Irma built into the grant project. And so it became, how are we going to take these facts? We knew Dinah's story, but we were uncovering new facts as part of our research. And how are we going to build out Dinah so that she wasn't just a series of facts, but a whole person, and with this deeper, more contextualized story. And so so ultimately we turned to our friends at Historic Philadelphia Inc. to meet Bob, and this has just really been a wonderful experience for all of us to work with all of you. Thank you. So I think Marissa and Irma, you look like you're still muted. I don't know who would like to go first. Bob, would you like to talk a little bit about the writing process and your research?
Yes, first I need to give a shout out to Sandy Lloyd, recently retired historian for Historic Philadelphia. And I learned a tremendous amount from her. In fact, she recommended me for this very project. And I think the one central thing that I learned working for Historic Philadelphia is that when you're telling historical stories, they need to be real and they need to be relevant. Real means research. Things need to be very solid historically. And of course, every little detail is not there, but you want to stick to the idea that things need to be likely based on all of the research that you do. And then the other part of it is relevant, because history is nice, but who cares if it's not relevant to what's going on today? So those were the two things I really wanted to focus on and bring it up. And of course, her humanity. I did attend some of those community meetings, and that was emphasized there. And it certainly helped to be with such talented people like Marissa and Irma, and to also have all the benefit of the research that was done here by Laura.
And my colleagues.
Colleagues, Rachel Coma, all those kinds of people that really made it much easier to sort of put everything together and come up with a believable story, a good story.
Yes, and so it was also our intent from the beginning that we wanted to ultimately have kind of a group of understudies even. So maybe more will present themselves and kind of come out of these airings of the story. But people to learn from Irma and work with Irma. We were hoping that we would ultimately have a younger Dinah and an older Dinah, that we could represent a kind of timeless version of Dinah, this whole woman with a whole lifetime of experiences. And as we got together, Marissa and Irma and Bob sort of became a kind of a coach, a producer and coach, if you will. Yeah. And I think Irma and Marissa started naturally almost kind of coaching each other and playing off of each other. And it just happened, or I guess I say organically, this sense of, wow, like this could really be presented as a conversation. It represents one life. but it's a sort of a recollection as well as a contextualizing. And so it evolved into this kind of tag teamed presentation that just has been really rewarding to watch blossom. And I'll let you two, Irma and Marissa, talk about your experience, how it felt to you to do this work together and separately at home too. I know you did lots of practicing at home as well.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. Yeah. Well, for me, I'll just jump right in here because I've been doing Dinah for a long time before Bob and Marissa came on the scene. And one of my wishes was that I knew more about her and that I knew more of her voice and that some pieces would be filled in. So when this grant came up, it was just like, oh, this is what I've always wanted. And it made me feel even more like Dinah. I feel like I really am Dinah because she had a life, she had family, she fell in love. She wasn't just a servant. I think that it came out that she was wise, you know, even George wanted to follow her around because it hinted that she had potions and she helped the family and she was a servant and she knew how to almost mother people. So there was a lot more to Dinah. And with Marissa coming along, we were able to bring more of that out. And it's almost like when Marissa and I started working together, it was like I was seeing, the older Dinah, was seeing the younger Dinah, seeing myself. You know how they say, what would you tell the younger Dinah? Well, it was there and it became so real and it was so easy to work. And with Bob being our coach and filling things in, we enjoyed working. It was a lot of work, but it didn't seem that hard once we got into it because we really enjoyed working together and to come out with a product like this. What do you say, Marissa?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. This process was very, yeah, it was a lot of work, but it didn't seem like a lot of work. It was very easygoing. And I came into the process, I think I was like the final piece to it, the younger Dinah. And, you know, I learned a lot from Irma and Bob about who Dinah was. Like I read the script, but getting to talk to them and also watching Irma perform, like I learned so much about who Dinah was. And so it was fun to translate that to a younger Dinah, but you could see like our conversations between Irma and I were like an intergenerational, we're an intergenerational conversation as Irma was saying. And, you know, I think that that's how the piece ended up becoming what it is, with the two of us sharing our monologue back and forth. It's like the experiences of young Dinah and older Dinah are having a conversation with each other. And you really get to see that wisdom gleaned like throughout the years. And it was really fun to just pick up on the nuances that Irma threw in there of Dinah with you know, Dinah being this human person. Like how would she feel seeing her love for the first time at a young age and then older, you know, and that captivation like still there. And so I learned so much, and being able to like retranslate that and all. So
there's actually a question here in the chat for you, Bob, from Michelle Markovitz. She says, Bob, excellent story brought to life. What primary sources did you use to determine Dinah's perspective?
I would say there had already been a tremendous amount of research done here. And I was able to get a lot from Laura and Rachel and other people, but I wasn't stopping there. It's amazing what you can also find on the internet. And because I really wanted the focus to be on Dinah, so I dug out about her being at Emlyn House before and just doing a lot of research there. I believe the script is available. I think it was going to be put online, and all of the references that I dug up from, you know, all kind of stuff, old movies I'd seen and whatever, just trying to get as much information to sort of make a picture and a framework for the story.
Yeah, and I would add, you just at the very beginning, the quiet time at the beginning of the presentation, there were just a few slides put there, but there's a larger PowerPoint, as well as Bob's story, and this video will ultimately be, as well as all of the kind of community feedback and things. We have a whole Dinah tab on our website, so it's stenton.org/Dinah. And you can really find a whole kind of archive of the project and tap into these resources that we have there. And one of the questions is also, is there, it's from Rick Hyman, is there a lot more buried in the archives probably about Dinah? And I suspect that there is. And we were using it as an advertiser for the event, and it also appeared in the slides at the beginning. Just last, I think it was February, Rachel and I were at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania going through some papers we as a staff had not been in before in the Belfield collection, and came across a small Deborah Norris Logan pocket almanac. And there it was, that Dinah died on February 21st, and that she was buried on the 23rd in the garden at Stenton by her own request. And this just gave us chills to read this and to see it in Deborah Logan's handwriting. And Deborah actually describes Dinah as our faithful old Dinah. And this is language that then appears on the 1912 plaque, the bronze plaque that really kind of got this whole project started. So that idea of the kind of faithful slave narrative that we've also been engaging with throughout the process, and some of the stereotypes of that come down to us of women like Dinah as mammies in kind of late 19th and 20th century culture was something else we addressed as part of the program. And it's been interesting, I think, to find Deborah Logan using that language in the first decade of the 19th century, that this is, you know, kind of carried all the way through. Let me just pick up, there were some other questions here that were some sort of more factual ones. One asking, was the term Africans used during Dinah's time, or was it a conscious decision to use it in place of the term slave? And I'll let the three of you kind of address sort of your way of thinking about the language within the context of the presentation.
Well, yeah, I would say that quite often slave would be used. However, it wasn't exclusive of African as well. And again, we're trying to connect it in relevancy. So yeah, I think either one would probably be commonly used at that time.
Personally, for me, as a storyteller, I stay away from the word slave because it's so into the psyche. Nobody was born a slave, they were enslaved, you know. And I want people to know, especially community people, know that these were Africans. Most people came from Africa. They came from other places, the Caribbean and everything. But I prefer the word African rather than slave. If we could subliminally get away from that word and know that people were enslaved, but they were not slaves. They're not born, you know, a slave, they became enslaved. So that's why I prefer to use the word African, and I think it's appropriate.
Okay. Do you have something to add to that, Marissa?
And I really agree with what both Bob and Irma said. And I would just, again, add also, like, just as Irma was saying, these were human beings who had a life before they were brought here. They had a homeland and they had a home, and it's good to reference that, to remind people that they didn't just show up here, right? And that wasn't all of who they were. So I would agree that I definitely prefer Africans over slave.
And then I would just add the kind of historical record perspective is that enslaved people in the historical record are described as Negroes. And we do sometimes use that term at Stenton, but put it in the context of wanting to let people know we're going to be using a historical term, Negro, as Black people were described in the time period, and just making it clear, because I do think that that word can actually make people still also feel uncomfortable. And this is challenging history, and I'm seeing some other comments just rolling by a little bit in the chat, how much this is touching people's souls. And yeah, this is just a really, I think, a poetic way, an artistic way, and a creative way to get into something that presented as a series of facts is really just hard to take in. And I think the three of you have put together something that has made Dinah human and relatable, and someone we're all glad we got to meet.
Yeah, I would also say that, that the term Negro, well, that's a Spanish derivation. And in fact, if you look at some of the older maps of Africa, you'll see that there were places there called Negro land. And so I really liked what Irma said, let's get the terminology less insulting and use the word enslaved. That's why I try to have that in there rather than slave.
Yeah, there are two questions people are asking about Dinah's descendants, and the grandson Cyrus is we don't actually know what became of him, and we know that Dinah's daughter Bess was already free in 1772 in William Logan's will. It's noted that she is already free, and so she may not be living at Stenton at all. And we have wondered, because we have seen Cyrus's manumission, which calls for his freedom at the age of 21, whether he's part of the reason that Dinah ultimately chooses to stay and work as a paid servant for the Logan family, that there's a familial reason. She's very motivated by her decisions to keep her family together as her actions bear out, and compelling the Logans to purchase her husband so that they can be united. And that was one of the other documents that also ran by in the beginning and plays a key part in understanding her as a person. And there's a comment here that I think I probably have to answer from a curatorial perspective about the ceramics on the table during the video as archaeological finds from the site, which they are. The comment says it makes everything more authentic. What was the thought process behind including them, and those pieces in particular? And I can actually say, sort of setting the stage took a little time. We played around with more than one table in the dining room. We had a sort of larger drop leaf dining table, and that didn't feel right. And we ultimately have the Dinahs are sitting at a tea table, and we played with some other ceramics as well. And ultimately this small unornamented stoneware teapot, and then the two probably locally made earthenware tea bowls just felt right. And those are ceramics that were excavated at Stenton in 1982 from a sort of pre-1760 context. So they actually are things that Dinah could have known in sort of her early years at Stenton, but we think were buried in an old laundry cistern by William Logan by about 1760. So, but they may very well have been kind of servants' tea wares. And let's see. I'm not quite sure to whom exactly this question is directed. So I'm going to direct it to all three of you. This question of what part of the monologue impacted you most? And so I guess that's also a question to say, kind of how has this impacted you personally? You know, this work on this story and getting to know this story. What's its impact on you?
I think.
Go ahead, Marissa.
No, you go first.
I think for me, first of all, there were so many parts of this monologue that really got me because of just Irma's story. Not Irma, Dinah's story, what Dinah experienced both personally and then what she witnessed as part of our history as a country, as a nation. But the thing that got me the most was when Dinah's husband became ill. And the fact that they weren't in the same household and that his fate was unknown. And then the courage that it took to go to people who own you because you're a possession and say, I need you to buy. There's just so many things that go through my mind. It's first of all, the courage to talk to these people, right? Because they're in a different class status, etc. But then what does it feel like to know that you're a human being, but then to also know that you're being treated like a horse or a teacup, a possession, and say, I need you to buy my husband, who I see as an individual and that I love and as a person, so that way he doesn't get cast aside maybe. Like, it's heart-wrenching to just think about that, the emotions and the thought that's going behind that whole scenario. But it's also very emboldening for me as an individual, because it's just, that takes a lot of guts and it takes a lot of love. Mm-hmm. So that's the part that stands out to me.
I think the part that stands out to me is when Dinah asked for her freedom. She has nothing else to lose. And she's so impassionate about, I want my freedom now. And like, she's surprised that they can't believe that she's asking for a freedom. Was this something that we said? She expresses that this is her birthright and that she's wanted to do this from the beginning, and her patience has run out, and she's gotten to the point where this is it. You know, I want my freedom and I want it now. That showed her power. That showed her, it also showed some vulnerability, because they could have said no and they could have, you know, just dismissed it and everything. But it took some energy, it took some guts, it took some bravery, some determination, and she really showed what she really wanted and was willing to do anything to get that freedom. And mm-hmm. That's relevant even to today.
I guess, and for me, there are two things that really stood out to me. And again, sometimes when you're doing historical stories, you start with an idea and the history is a vehicle to communicate it. Mm-hmm. And given all of the unrest and problems we've experienced in this country lately, mm-hmm. and this idea of fire and someone preventing the fire, I really wanted to try and communicate that idea that, you know, we all have a role to prevent fire and sort of a mutual destruction kind of a thing. And the other thing that stood out to me was Dinah, the name. One of the first things I did, I said, well, where did this name come from? And I did find that it's a biblical name. If you look in Genesis chapter 30 to 40, there's this story of Dinah. And in that story, it's Jacob's only daughter, and she is taken against her will and forced into a relationship she did not prefer to have. And then I looked at also the meaning of that name. It means sort of like God vindicates, God avenges. And I saw this project as sort of a vindication of Dinah and what she went through, and so many other Dinahs that were out there, that their stories can now be told. And that thing.
Yeah, thank you. I realized that going back to the questions that have been submitted, I got off track when I started talking about Cyrus, and I didn't actually answer the question about whether we found any more of Dinah's descendants. And we are hopeful. There are a couple little leads that we're still working on with that, and so I'm hopeful that we may yet find descendants of Dinah, but we don't have a last name, as is often the case. You can find that one is taken up, but stay tuned as we kind of continue down that research road. And then I have a question. What do we know about the transition from enslaved to free/paid workers, from Dennis Lucy? And we do know in Dinah's case that she was paid 12 pounds a year. We do have this notation in, I think it's from Thomas Fisher's ledger, and that's because William Logan is deceased. Thomas Fisher is his brother-in-law who takes charge of kind of Stenton and the accounts in a kind of transitional phase there. And you know, we haven't found anything that says there's a contract or anything like that, but clearly there was an agreement, and the Logans did pay her and continued to house and feed, and probably has continued to help clothe her as well, I would expect, but we don't know that for sure. And then there's a question, can you envision the program evolving eventually into an even bigger cast, breathing life into other people of color at Stenton in the story, with the main focus always on Dinah? From a Stenton staff perspective, I can say that we have been thinking a lot about other enslaved people who are at Stenton, and Dinah comes to Stenton as part of this William and Hannah generation, what we think of as the second generation. And we've done quite a lot of research on the James Logan generation as well, and been thinking about how we want to honor and remember those people as well. And we know their names, and we do know stories such as an enslaved man named Sampson who burned a building at Stenton and went to court, and so there's the case is there for us too. So there are more stories, and we could think about how I don't know, would you want to, we could sit through a 2-hour production of stories all at once, or we could continue to almost make episodes. I think there's a lot of potential, and that there seems to be a lot of I feel there's a lot of encouragement for this kind of work. So potentially, I think absolutely that could be a future to make it bigger or make it more. So don't go too far. And I think that officially takes us through the questions that have been submitted thus far. I had one there's there's one actually that came in through the chat about Dinah's origin as well. And this is also something that we're still not entirely, I can't say that we have a sense of certitude about, but there is some evidence that Dinah, at least on one side of her parentage, may be descended from a mixed relationship that took place in the late 17th century in New Jersey. And so we are still also researching that. We suspect, if that's the case, that Dinah would have been classified in her time period as someone who was of mulatto, that she would be a mixed race person, and that might have also made her more likely to be working in the house, an enslaved person working in the house, and seemingly perhaps the kind of close woman servant to Hannah Emlyn Logan, as she was this kind of dowry gift, as Irma made plain during the presentation. And it looks like one more question has rolled in. Great story about Dinah saving Stenton during the war. Why do you think the Battle of Germantown ended up at Cliveden? Was Stenton known and maybe off limits due to James Logan's important service to Britain? So during the war, actually, is just after James Logan's son William and Hannah, his wife, had both died. And so there's often been this sort of background idea in our minds as part of the story that maybe Dinah was actually holding down the fort by herself. But that's not actually completely true. We have learned that James Logan Jr. was still alive until the 1780s? I think that's right. But he lived to a pretty ripe old age and was around and would come and go, as well as the man who would inherit Stenton, William's son, George, Dr. George Logan, was in Edinburgh studying medicine during the war, but his brother Charles had not yet married and had property in Philadelphia, but was also coming and going from Stenton. So there are these Logans kind of hanging around, and we did find some correspondence suggesting that a niece, I think it is, of James Logan Jr. didn't really like to have to visit him. There was this implication that he was like not fun Uncle Jimmy kind of in her letter. So you can imagine there's some kind of dynamics that are going on, family dynamics, as well as the dynamics with servants on site and plantation managers and caretakers kind of keeping this place going. We also know that George allowed some sort of refugees from, and Dennis is in the background, he, I think, knows this story better than I do, but from some Charlestonians ended up staying at Stenton for a little while during the war. And George Washington was there in August of 1777 for a couple of nights, not a long time. So we can actually say that George Washington slept at Stenton. And then General Howe used it as his headquarters prior to the Battle of Germantown. And that question asked something about why did the battle end up at Cliveden? And I'm not an expert on the history of the battle. There are a lot of people out there who know that history better than I do, and who may also, some of them may be on this call. But there are all kinds of weather factors and so forth that converged to mean that they kind of were at that point in Germantown on this foggy day. And so I don't think that the idea of sort of that it was planned, it would all kind of, this rendezvous would necessarily happen there. But there are maps in the royal collections in England that show Battle of Germantown maps. That show the encampment of Howe's troops at Stenton, and it's one of our resources for understanding what the kind of topography and area around Stenton was like during the Revolutionary War, and things like the Wingahawken Creek that are now buried underground. And I have another question that has rolled in. Is Dinah still buried at Stenton, and where? Or was her grave moved at some point? This is also a very good question. This almanac that I mentioned, we came upon from February. I didn't say the date because as part of the discovery, initially, we didn't know the year because someone had torn the sort of title page with the year that the almanac was printed out. And so we had to go away and kind of go through events of the time that are listed in the almanac and so forth to figure out it was 1805 is the year that Dinah died and was buried at Stenton. And it says, Deborah says that she's buried in my garden, which we know is kind of on the east side of the house, the sort of narrow side of the house toward the park. But we don't know how deep into the property it is, whether she might be sort of inside the chain link fence, for those of you who are familiar with the property, or actually in part of what Stenton Park, kind of outside the chain link fence. As part of this project early on in the grant, we had money to do ground penetrating radar to try to locate her grave because there was some early 20th century indications, including a newspaper article and a postcard, that she was actually buried under this piece of granite onto which the 1912 plaque was mounted, which was out in Stenton Park near the present day rec center. That stone support ultimately became a drinking fountain at one point in mid-century. And so we were concerned that even if she had been buried there, that it would have been badly disturbed, but we didn't find anything. And so we don't know exactly where she's buried, but we think for sure she is buried somewhere at Stenton, and we do hope that we will have the opportunity to find that. It's a little bit of a needle in a haystack. And there's another reference to that was in the slides earlier about a particular tree that she's buried under, and unfortunately that would be long gone as well. But it's not to say we won't find her. Does anybody, I was going to ask this question myself, just for Irma and for Marissa, this sense of bringing your different professional and presenting backgrounds to it, from acting and storytelling. And I just wondered if either of you or both of you had something you wanted to share about kind of that and kind of combining those kind of styles of presentation.
Well, it is different because some people think that acting is storytelling, storytelling is acting. But I learned from Marissa some of the subtleties, and it made me more sharing, you know, because as a storyteller, often, even though I'm an interactive storyteller, you're doing things alone, you know, and sometimes each story, you do a story, it's different each time. This reenactment is somebody's life, and it's just different. And I think that I learned from Marissa where to put the drama and how that, you know, how that drama really shaped the character more. It added to what I did in the beginning, and it made the character richer. So my hat goes off to you, Marissa. I learned a lot from you.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, being an actor, you do say a lot like acting and storytelling, but I also learned that there is a difference between coming in acting and versus being a storyteller. And I realized, like, at least in my brain, in my vocabulary, storytelling is kind of more improvisational, as we would say, you know, in acting. And I learned, you know, I came in knowing the script from beginning to end, you know, and then wanting to dive in and flesh out the parts. But like, as far as like movement expression or vocal inflection, you know, not having fun, I'll say having fun with some of the words. And spending time with Irma, I learned to kind of loosen up a little bit that I wasn't I wasn't tied. I wasn't tied to the script necessarily, right? We have the story of Dinah, and we want to faithfully tell that story. But in telling the story, there are moments, where you can jump out. And so I learned that, because as an actor, when I'm working and I'm giving with the script, I'm always be true to the script. What did the writer write? Did I say the right word, or did I put it? I mean, eventually in performance, it might change because you can't change it. You can't go back in a performance. But it was a newfound freedom that I got from working with Irma and from Bob. With that. So it's just a wonderful exchange that we had.
A great example, because I was like, I'd never worked with a writer who, this was Bob's work, he had written it. And I'm used to taking liberties. And so when I was kind of scared to death when I threw in that, the song just came naturally. It popped in my head, and I just started singing the song and everything. And then I was like, oh, I wonder what Bob's gonna do. And he liked it. So we kept it.
Yeah, can I just say that the thing I really enjoyed so much about working on this project was the collaboration.
Yes.
From the beginning, presenting the script to Laura and Rachel and other people, they had comments and they had feedback. And I found, let's incorporate that. And as Irma is saying and Marissa is saying, the script is not the king. The performance is the king.
Right.
And you try to get the best out of everybody that's involved in the project, so you end up with a better project. So I had actually written the story for one person. And I actually, don't mind saying, I had to be convinced to open it up for two people. This was something that I was never in my mind when I sat down and read it. But I found that saying, this is going to work. And I wish that others, maybe there's a whole bunch of them down there in Washington, D.C., that need to learn this, that if you collaborate, what you're going to get is better than if you insist on having it your own way.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap it up, I'm reminded both of the song about the fire in all of us, which I so appreciate that came to you in the moment, Irma, and that it's part of all this. And in the early chats, someone was asking a question about the video fire, and I don't know if Dave from PWP Video, if you want to reveal yourself, and we can end with a little bit about the video production itself, because we didn't start out thinking we were going to make a video either, and maybe specifically tell us a little bit about how you created the fire. I might be talking into a tunnel. Oh, there he is.
Oh, no, here I am. It's funny, Bob, you said about collaboration. In the film business, we have a saying: there's the film you write, the film you shoot, and the film you edit. And as the person who edited this, I attempted to take no liberties whatsoever with the story. It was all about performance. So it was able to take different performances. And also the performance of the fireplace. Yes, I did. I want to make sure, I'll go on record as saying, it does not get any historical people upset. That was not a real fire. We did not light a fire in the fireplace at Stenton. Those were just LED flicker lights, just to give everyone like a nice little hint of fire. And then it was completely digital in the afterwards in post.
The digital was the flying sparks, right? Is that?
Flying spark. I try to keep it as subtle as possible. I didn't
Yeah.
want to make it about the fire specifically. I kept it subtle. Yeah, just some sparks and then a little bit of glowing effects. And once in a while, you see a little flicker pop up as if it was a small little warming fire in the fireplace, in the hearth.
I have to say, yeah, excuse me, I mean, but I have to say your involvement, sir, was also very important in
Yes.
the finished project.
Well, thank
Mhm.
you very much. It was
really appreciated all of the comments and all of the input that you made. And again, it goes towards how this was such a great collaborative effort.
Yes.
I agree. Thank you. It was a pleasure and honor to work on. It's a great highlight to do historical recreation stuff and actual with actors and a narrative. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful process. It's fun to work on. Thank you. It was great working with you all.
Thank you.
And yeah, let's do some more. Let's do some more.
Yeah.
Lot more stories to tell. Let's
Yep.
There are.
do it again.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe we should let everybody get on with their evenings, but I'm so grateful for all of you for your work on this project, for bringing it to life. And I'm grateful for all of the attendees who come and witnessed the production tonight and contributed your questions. And thank you again. Have a wonderful night, everyone.